The question is that the amendments be agreed to, and I call the honourable member for Warringah.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I rise to speak on this government's online safety amendment, Social Media Minimum Age Bill 2024. And while I accept that there is a goal of dealing with online harms and protecting young people, I think this is incredibly misguided, and it is a window-dressing attempt by the government to look like it is doing something about harm without actually doing anything that is going to be meaningful. I'm concerned this legislation will backfire by driving underground the harms of social media and, in fact, not preventing ultimately how young people will access social media and they will find their way. But what it will do is fail to hold social media companies accountable for moderating harmful content, which will still proliferate on these platforms. The potential dangers of social media are undeniable. We're all concerned. I think we've all in this place been exposed to the dark and the black hole of negativity that can exist there. The anonymity of people dealing through social media, thinking that it's a platform on which they can say and behave in the most atrocious way. But that doesn't get solved by just banning young people under 16 from these platforms. That gets solved by imposing a duty of care on these platforms, making them responsible for harmful content. And that is where the government should be stepping up to the plate and actually do what is maybe hard but necessary to be done if you want to be a government that is taken seriously on protecting young people and all users from harm. There's no doubt we need to get the balance right, and of course protecting children is so important. But we have to. But let's get real for the average age of this place, right? We are in a whole different age category. Young people have grown up online. For many, social media is not just a pastime, it's an important communications tool that connects them with their peers and wider community. And it's been really interesting to listen to some of the justifications by members of government to talk about, and the Prime Minister has done it, talking about how we want to see the kids back on the footy field and playing and all of those things. Of course we want them to be active. But the suggestion that somehow banning social media is going to immediately result in this uptick of physical activity or social interaction without additional measures or any real research in how that's even going to happen is just taking Australians for fools, I think, in how this legislation has been drafted and presented and the time in which it's been put forward. Because what we also know is young people find their community through social media, and it's been fascinating for me as a mum of young adults now, but watching them online and being concerned about the harms and the influence, but also then observing the benefits, seeing how through certain mediums they've had the opportunity to find their peers, find their tribe, feel connected. And they are all the things that are at risk of being lost. Young people don't just access services through, and what the Minister has indicated will be some exceptions, they actually also access information and services through their peers, through friends, relaying their experiences, and that will all be lost. Now, I don't dispute there is a dark side to the internet, to social media, that urgently needs to be addressed. But we also need to be really clear. Young people tell me about the positive ways they engage on these platforms. They build their communities, they explore creativity, they start businesses, they learn, they get an opportunity to see beyond the boundaries of just the national issues or like legacy media's take on events, and they can connect with young people all over the world. This is something that has been unique to their generation. And we know, of course, it also allows them to stay connected with families and friends. I think, anyone like grandparents, how do you stay connected with a young person? Actually, through social media, it gives you a window into their world that you don't have in any other way. So sadly, the government is not respecting the voice of young people here, and I think it's telling to see just how little that's really being reflected in the government speeches. And instead, it is people in this place imposing their will on young people. Rather than representing them, they are imposing their will on them. It's a blunt policy tool that punishes ultimately young people while letting perpetrators of harmful content and the platforms that host it completely off the hook. The bill seeks to restrict users under the age of 16 from having a social media account by relying on social media companies to take reasonable steps for the age assurance of their users. Well, and in all my queries to the Minister and the Government of what are those reasonable steps and how will this age assurance process work, they don't know. This is a complete unknown. It is completely putting the horse before the cart when it comes to, the cart before the horse, in terms of this legislation. The government has no idea how this is going to work, and yet it is taking up vulnerable time. The bill's intention, well-meaning, as I say, it acknowledges very real harm of online platforms, and I have got concerns about that. But the effectiveness of this bill is highly in doubt, and there are serious concerns about unintended consequences to this bill. So I do seek to move the amendment circulated in my name that seeks to adjourn the debate in relation to this bill, that it should not be rushed through this parliament the way it has been. We should have a comprehensive understanding of how these measures can be implemented and the unintended consequences to the legislation. We know that the government has just awarded a tender for the age assurance trial, which will inform advice of the implementation and enforcement of the ban to the government and the e-Safety Commissioner. I ask the government to not call a vote on the second reading speech until a final report with the results of the age assurance trial has been presented to Parliament so that parents and users can be informed. The government is being selective on the harms that it wishes to protect young people from, and it is prioritising a blunt social media ban over protecting young people from the harm of many real things such as gambling advertising and the algorithm and how it works. Gambling advertising poses a significant concern for young people, and its well-documented links to increased gambling participation. So the government is absolutely being selective about which harm it's choosing to prioritise. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it's when the government was under the pump about introducing a ban on gambling advertising that all of a sudden we get the posturing and the big announcement around an age ban, online ban. The ban on gambling advertising was unanimously recommended by a multi-partisan committee following an in-depth inquiry into the harms of gambling. The government has accepted that recommendation and yet to date refused to take action. So on top of this, we know that polling shows over 70% of Australians want a ban on gambling advertising. So if you want to win the favour of voters, act on banning gambling advertising. The message couldn't be any clearer. Instead, the government is focusing on a minimum age bill, which was originally drafted, as I said, just in September. It's a distraction to that promise to ban gambling advertising, and it ultimately won't be implemented until 2026. So why is this being rushed without proper scrutiny, with only a couple of days in this parliament? This is bad government, bad governance. When the bill was introduced last week, it was the first time we were even able to read and understand the details of the proposed legislation. And now, in the last week of Parliament, the government's expediting this bill, limiting the availability of parliamentary scrutiny and oversight over its effect. We have serious concerns around privacy consequences, and ultimately this bill will impact all users. It's not just the under-16s that will be banned. All users of social media will, to some extent, have to be assessed by those platforms as to whether or not they fall foul of it. What we know is that this bill requires much more scrutiny. Last week, the bill was sent to Senate Committee on Environment and Communications, and the committee only accepted submissions for 24 hours. I mean, if that is not a joke when it comes to public consultation, I don't know what more could be said. In that time, the inquiry was inundated with over 15,000 submissions. Clearly, the public feels strongly about this issue. Even more reason the bill should be subjected to proper scrutiny. Only yesterday morning were the committee able to hear from the community on wide-ranging impacts of the bill, and the committee will publish their recommendations today, but here we are debating and being asked to shortly vote on it. And this is all only 5 days after the bill was sent to committee. Now, The government has even acknowledged that this is a short-term approach to protect young people whilst they continue to work on longer-term solutions for protecting people from harms online. Well, the member for Goldstein has already put to the parliament tabling a private member's bill that addresses much of those harms. So if the government is not capable of coming up with proper legislation, adopt the work the member for Goldstein has done and let's get on with a real protection of people online through a duty of care. There's no details from the government about any of their plans to legislate further protections. It's a bit of a trust me, we've got this, we'll get to this. But all we've got is this band-aid solution of just imposing a ban on under-16s. If the government was serious about safeguarding young people from harms online, they could have introduced a temporary ban or fast-tracked to implement a statutory duty of care for online platforms, start dealing with bots online, start dealing with anonymous accounts, force some accountability and some monitoring of harm, do something about the algorithm. So I ask the government why it's prioritising this legislation to rush through Parliament, knowing that it won't be implemented for time, it doesn't even have a proper process. In contrast, gambling advertising is something that needs to be done. Now, when we talk about harm from online platforms, we know it's ever-present, and certain groups, such as children and young teenagers, are at greater risk of this harm. Young people more than ever are feeling isolated and excluded, and some teenagers do use social media platforms, have regularly reported, some find lower life satisfaction than those who don't use online platforms. But we also know that others who feel isolated find their tribe and find great comfort out of social media as well. We know that online platforms enable young people to endure cyberbullying, hate speech, online abuse, as well as harmful content. All these potential harms are not to be understated and create a real and ongoing threat to their mental health. And I agree that online platforms must be made to be responsible to keep everyone safe on their platforms. They should be forced to promote respectful, honest, authentic content, a responsibility that these platforms often fail to do. But nothing about this proposal does this. The blanket ban on social media is not the answer. In fact, the Butterfly Foundation, who represent Australians impacted by eating disorders and body image issues, they've stated that a blanket ban takes the onus off platforms to do better and could negatively impact people looking for help who are socially and physically isolated. Restricting access to under 16, the government has neglected the opportunity to regulate platforms to materially improve online safety for everyone. And so I really ask the government to do better. Surely you can do better than this, than trying to just grab a headline of just, trying to look like you're doing something about online when really you're not. I appreciate that for young parents this is incredibly distressing, and it's easy to think that banning it will be the solution. The reality is it's just going to push it underground. It's still going to happen. I've got a modern family of 5, they're all adults now, but I know how tech-savvy they are, what they do. And for me, legislation that would allow them to reset their default settings, to make sure the algorithms are much safer, that there is a responsibility and a duty of care. These are all things that would make a difference. Of course, we also need greater education. Young people and all users need to understand how to be safer and more responsible digital citizens. This is an important piece of the puzzle to keep young people safe. And instead, but of course, the government is not focusing on that. What could actually be done that would be... I think of where kids have found their tribe online. For example, schools strike for climate. Young people's lives have been online, and social media has played an important role in amplifying young people's voices on and they may otherwise have been excluded, and their voices not reflected in mainstream media. For example, Lucy Flynn is a 14-year-old from our electorate who, after recovering from an eating disorder, she decided to make her own petition to call on the government to provide more public hospital beds for treatment of those with eating disorders. She harnessed the power of social media to tell her story and amplify the issues in eating disorder funding. So online platforms can provide a platform to reach people outside their geographical communities, provide an avenue for youth leadership on issues that matter to them, and for the ability for young people to feel that they have control over their future. When I think that the government doesn't even want to be saddled with a duty of care to young people when it comes to the environment, and now they want to take away their capacity to mobilise and to have a voice when it comes to climate issues. School Strikes for Climate is a classic example where thousands of young people came together to march and require the environment to march on the Environmental Minister's office and demand real and substantive climate action. This provided an invaluable opportunity for young people to have a voice and heard in a way.
The member's time has expired. Is the amendment seconded? Is the amendment seconded?
Deputy Speaker, I second the member for Warringah's amendment and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you.